Our vision on this channel is to make authentic living a lifestyle. Number one, and the key to authentic living as a lifestyle is self-awareness. For you to live a very authentic life, you have to be extremely self-aware. You have to be able to know who you are. For you to know who you are, you need tools, you need help, you need support, you need a way to understand who you are. And you will see in the past videos that I've talked about self-awareness, I've talked about the tools of self-awareness, I've given you ways to use these tools, I've told you how my favorite tool is journaling, but I've also given you a number of other tools. Now, I don't list all the tools. Some you will find useful, others you won't. Just find what works for you here. So after self-awareness, after the tools, we now dive into self-identity. From the last video that I did, I spoke about self-identity. I described what it is, how it works, how you start to build an identity, and the different kinds of identities that we build along the way, along this journey called life. Yeah. Today, in particular, I want us to immerse ourselves into this particular kind of identity. So, this particular identity is something we call cultural identity. Now, what is cultural identity? Cultural identity is basically who you become based on the culture that you have been brought up in, based on the culture that you've been taught, based on the culture that is happening. But what does this word culture mean? Of course, for me, when I'm doing these videos, I try as much as possible to use very simplistic language, very simplistic definition so that we can all understand, right? Culture is a collection of beliefs. Mark that word, beliefs. It's a collection of beliefs, it's a collection of practices, norms, habits, things that a group of people come together and practice together and do together. It's also made up of language, words, traditions, what you'd call, there's a word I'm looking for, rituals. So those are like beliefs and practices and things like that. Yes. So culture is basically a collection of things that you all believe in and you practice. Could be, traditionally. Of course, for a very long time, we've looked at culture as a traditional aspect of our lives. But as we all know, culture is just a group of people coming together and deciding this is how we're going to live our lives. This is what matters to us. This is what we're practicing. This is how we are speaking. This is how we are dressing. This is how we are basically doing life. And so the moment people come together and decide on those certain aspects of their lives and how they're going to do them, then we can now say that's a culture. That becomes a culture. Yeah. And so that's why for so long, culture goes hand in hand with tradition. And a lot of people assume that culture is maybe like old school because you have the word tradition, but tradition is basically something that's repeated over and over and over again, right? And again, simplistic understanding. So I would always encourage you, when you listen to these videos, go out there and Google or find the definitions, use a dictionary, but try to get an understanding of your own. Yeah. And not just for my video. Any other information you are watching on the internet or elsewhere, do more research about it. Don't just take it as it is. Yeah. I think one of the things we want to now understand is, why have I chosen the cultural identity out of all the ones that I'd listed? National identity, global identities, academic identities. We had, you've heard of the word corporate identity. But out of all these identities, why is culture identity the most important? The reason culture identity is very important because it's sort of a foundational kind of identity. A lot of people have a foundation or are anchored in a culture identity. This then means that it gives you a very strong foundation. When you have a culture identity, you have a language that is shared, you have practices, you have norms, you have beliefs, you have a certain way of doing things that is shared. That gives you a very strong foundation. When you have that strong foundation, it's very hard to break you. One, you'll be more confident, you will be more grounded in who you are, because you know who you are, you know the things you do. It's a core to you. You believe in what you're doing. Yes, you'll be more grounded. You'll be more confident. You'll definitely be more stable emotionally, physically, health wise. Generally, that culture foundation is very, very, very important for any one of us in terms of identity, right? Now, the fact that it makes you very strong and it strengthens the communities, it strengthens you as a person, you become very hard to break emotionally, but you also become very hard to manipulate. And so that particular identity became a target for the powers that be or for people who want to be in control. Now, it's very, very, very hard to control someone whose culture identity is very firm and strong. Yeah. And so that sort of became a target. Now, the reason why I'm talking about culture identity is I want you to start thinking about it in the sense of power. Start asking certain questions. Why is this particular identity of interest to people in power or to people who have the power, who have control? And also, as we go on in having these conversations, let us start thinking about how that particular identity fits into the African narrative. Because again, when we're talking about identity, we are talking about what gives us power. And identity really gives us power. And that's why you see that someone would rather work in a brand, an organization that's a brand, earn very little money, but have that pride of saying, I work in XYZ. Okay, I hope there's no organization called XYZ like in real life. But yeah, like I work in a certain organization X or a certain organization Y, and yet even when they're in that organization, they may not even be earning more. Actually, a guy who works probably as a border guy might be earning more money, right? But because of identity, there is power. That is like identity has it's like a currency of its own. I'm telling you. And that's why you'll see some people will do whatever it takes to identify with certain schools. Someone wants to say, I went to this school, for secondary. I went to this university because of identity. Yeah. So at the end of the day, identity has power. Identity gives you power. And so, for people who are interested in power, one of the things that they target is that identity. Which identity gives you the most strength? Which identity is hard to break? Which identity makes it hard for us to control and manipulate these people? And that becomes the identity that they definitely attack.